Welcome to the Lair of Secrets podcast, the podcast about gaming and being a geek by two 40-something geek dads. I am David Moore, and I've been tinkering in the dirigible hangar trying to get the old girl flying again.
And I'm Ken Newquist, and I recently got beamed halfway across the galaxy and back. I'm fine, mostly. We're getting back into and despite all of the interstellar travel and your dirigible work, we are actually getting something back into something of a routine, even if I can't actually speak. The routine is there, even if the words aren't.
Yep.
As we recorded last week, we recorded this week. So what you been up to?
Yeah. So two almost makes 2 points is enough to make a line.
Very true.
We're getting there. Let me tell you about what I've been doing in Library 67. I've been reading Attack Surface by Cory Doctorow. I've followed him for years, and I enjoy his work. This one, though, I'm having some trouble with. The idea behind it is the third in the Little Brother series, I believe, and this is the character Masha, who's kind of an antagonist in the first book of Little Brother, and this is kind of her redemption arc. She knows her stuff. She knows security. She's kind of works for the bad guys, and by bad guys I mean like government contractors who go to various governments and have fairly loose morals in terms of who's watching who. And so she kind of compartmentalizes everything of like, I'm doing the right thing, but I know I'm doing the wrong thing. So like she does her day job, but then goes out, does her day job and installs all these security exploits and stuff so the government can watch its citizens, and then goes to the resistance fighters and tells them all about how to increase their operational security to defend against the things that she just installed earlier that day. It's an interesting concept, interesting character, but it was something that my daughter said that kind of stuck with me when she started reading Little Brother, is that the descriptions of like the hacking or the descriptions of how to defend yourself from that hacking kind of threw her out of the book. I've noticed that when I'm reading this, I listened to Little Brother, but when I'm reading this book, I notice those areas a lot because there's a lot of them and they last for a little while. It's a little bit of an exposition dump. So I'm about halfway through, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to finish it.
Ooh.
Yeah, I may just skip a chapter or two, and maybe that will get me past the part that I'm stuck on. But like I said, I really like his work, but this one just not feeling this one.
Gotcha.
However, I did pick up and just to show you, like, I noticed, hey, I haven't heard from Lois McMaster Bujold in a while. I really like her Miles Vorkosigan stuff. Did she come out with a new Miles Vorkosigan novel? Which she probably didn't, because, she's got a whole bunch of them, almost as many as like the Dresden Files is right now. And he got older. He's like a full-on adult and everything like that. Turns out she did about 2 years ago. But before I found that out, I found out she came out recently with the book called Penric's Demon, which is a fantasy series that she's now doing, which is, I've really enjoyed it. I like her writing style. The world building's pretty cool. The concept behind this is all the sorcerers in the world. It's a very medieval style book setting with churches who control different areas of life. And there are, I think, 4 or 5 gods. And the bastard god, as they say, is where all the demons come from. And demons aren't necessarily evil, but they can be, but they inhabit people's bodies. They can possess them if the person isn't strong enough to contain it, so, at least so far as I've read. But if you have a demon inside your body, you can actually control some of its power. And so that's where all the sorcerers in this land come from. But it's kind of a low magic sort of setting. There's magic, but it's not fireballs whizzing around and stuff like that. At least not yet. But the main character, he's on the road. He's going to his betrothal, comes upon a caravan, and there's an older woman there who's fallen off of her horse, is not doing really good. He without thinking, he's like, I need to go help. And so he rushes up and he talks to her a little bit, and she basically dies in his arms. And unbeknownst to him, she was one of these sorcerers, and her demon transfers to him. And she was pretty high placed in the church. And so at this point now, it's like he then collapses unconscious and wakes up a day later. At this point in the novel where I'm reading, he's basically on his way to where she was going to, which is a larger area of the church, so that they can figure out what to do with him or train him or something. He's still pretty confused about stuff because he's a minor noble, but so minor in the sense that their village, town, if people need help going out and herding their cows, he will have done that sort of thing. So he's not
Okay.
he's not the noble who drinks wine and things like that. It's pretty cool. I really like her writing style. I've just been sucked into this one. That's from Library 67. The other place that I've been exploring, unfortunately, is our dark house, which is, for our listeners out there, it's like a greenhouse, but it has no windows and it's underground. No, we don't grow mushrooms there, but it has been the cause for my not doing a whole lot this last week. The spores and my allergies this last week have made me pretty much useless. Did a little bit of a game, or actually 2 games on Saturday with some friends. We did Star Wars West End game system. That was pretty fun. And the rest of the week, I'm between contracts, so I don't have to be on all the time. So I did a lot of watching of Netflix and Amazon Prime, like finishing out the rest of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. that I hadn't watched, getting caught up with Winona Earp and others that I don't really recall because they just don't stand out in my mind, but were fun to just kind of watch for a while. But what is up with you? I mean, traveling halfway across the galaxy and back sounds more fun than my last week.
Yeah, probably. It sounds like it. I mean, I had my own misadventures wandering in the wilds of New Jersey as well. I've really been everywhere. But I won't get into that because it's not nearly as much fun as skipping across the galaxy. So my son in the gaming room. So I'm going to mix and mash my locations. But my gaming group played session 0 of our new Savage World science fiction game, which we talked about, I think, on the previous show. Which is set on a ring world. And so to catch people up on the premise, the idea is that we are various representatives from around a ring world that was struck by a giant asteroid. That asteroid punched through the edge of the rim, causing this massive mountain known as the Fist of God. And our characters are trying to figure out what is happening to the ring world, because this is about 150 years after the event. And we've determined that the ring world is no longer entirely stable. And it's a lot of world buildy type stuff. That's the whole intention behind this game, is to figure out, okay, well, what's interesting in the ring world? Where do our characters come from? Most of the players are actually playing inhabitants of the ring world, usually with like different manifestations of technology. So there's a wizard, but he has all of these kind of jargony explanations for his spells. So they consider them to be wizards of science. And so, the great Lord Newton bestowed upon us the theory of gravitation, right? And so it's great. Like he's doing a fantastic job with it. We have another guy who's kind of like the face man who he's an inspirational speaker. He's basically playing like a bard. And so he's taking the Miracles background in Savage World, which is kind of Buffy like a bard, not Buffy like the Vampire Slayer. Buffy is like, you're buffing other characters by giving them bonuses and what have you.
Got it.
Amusingly, his dice completely betrayed him the entire session, and he failed at every roll that he tried. But it was funny, and that's kind of like building into his character.
Yep.
My character is actually crashed on the ring world. He's Guy Rockwell. He's the sole surviving red shirt of the starship Saratoga. So he comes from like a Federation-y, U.S. Federation, the United Federation of Planets type background. I haven't quite built that out yet, but the idea is like he is the red shirt, but he's the red shirt who lived. So I gave him like the luck background and like the MacGyver edge and like all of these things to explain how he was the only one to survive the starship crash, right?
Nice.
And so he's got technobabble. And, he is adventuring with all of these people he considers basically to be savages. But, hey, maybe this is my chance to get off the ring world. And, I can totally fix that for you. So It's cool. We haven't played Savage Worlds in, I don't know, like a year or two. So it was pretty cool to kind of ease back into the system. Like there's a few things. We're playing the new Suede edition, which is Savage Worlds Adventure edition, which I think we talked about briefly last week. And so there's like going to any new edition of a game, there's some upgrades. There's some things that don't quite work the way that they did before, but we all agreed to play this edition so we could all be in agreement about what the actual rules are.
Nice.
We learned our lessons from like Dungeons and Dragons 2nd edition, which had like, I don't know, 3 different versions of the same rule, right?
Right.
But it was comfortable. Like it's actually just like slipping into an old pair of slippers. You know, it's just, ooh, this is kind of comfy, right? I like how dice explode. Oh, that's hilarious. Look what happened to you, right? So that's pretty cool. As research, I actually stepped into the teleportation cube and I just completely binge watched Star Trek: The Lower Decks.
Nice.
Because I renewed my subscription to CBS Interactive. I think that's what it is. It was whatever CBS's streaming thing is.
Yeah, it was recommended to me this week, actually, but I do not have like CBS All Access or any of that stuff. I tried to buy the season on Amazon, but it is not available as a standalone purchase.
Oh, yeah. So that's actually, I tried to actually use the CBS Interactive app on the PlayStation 4. That's how I originally subscribed to it. And that's what I had done previously.
Got it.
CBS Interactive's or CBS All Access app is terrible on the PS4. It just crashed. Like it black screened every time you tried to load. So I immediately canceled my subscription and then went through Amazon instead.
Got it.
Because it's only like $10 a month or something like that. And I'm only going to watch it for like a month or two until I get all caught up on all my Star Trek fix.
Nice.
But, so I watched the Lower Decks. And any of you with PS4s, I don't know if it's any better on the PS5. Subscribing to CBS through Amazon, I think, is totally the way to go. It was way easier than dealing with the CBS app, which also was terrible because like all of the controls, this isn't really meant to be a rant about CBS All Access, but like none of the controls are the same for anything else that you do on the PlayStation, right? Like Amazon, Hulu, they more or less have similar buttons. CBS is like, no, we're going to make the pause button the circle. Like,
geez.
What? Like, why are we doing this? Right?
Yeah.
Like, it's
I mean,
really counterintuitive.
Years ago, I was brought in as part of our contract was to work on Showtime Anytime. Years and years ago, back when Dexter was still running, just to give you guys an idea of when that was. And you know, it had been written by a bunch of contractors before us, but it was kind of not. They brought us in because there were things going wrong, and so we came in for 4 weeks and not only finished out we really would like you to finish this within the 4 weeks, but we finished their entire list for the next 6 months in 4 weeks, just 2 of us, and it was like performance issues and interface issues, similar to what you're talking about, and that's one of the projects I'm a lot more proud of. You know, all that code's gone because Flash is going away, but
right.
But that's what it was written in was Adobe Flex and Flash. So,
wow,
it was a lot of fun.
Very cool. So, Star Trek. Going back to Star Trek: The Lower Decks, it's about how basically all the non-officers, non-bridge crew live and work and love on a starship, right? But not one of like the big starships like the Enterprise or the Excelsior or something like that. No. They're on it's the Cerritos. So it is basically like a Starfleet support vessel, right? Like they're there. They don't do first contact missions. They do second contact missions, right? So they show up after the Enterprise and they do like the follow up, right?
Oh, geez.
They're basically like the janitors of Starfleet. And so you have all of the classic Star Trek tropes, just like kind of comically subverted, right? So it's a little bit reminiscent of John Scalzi's Red Shirts.
Red Shirts. Yeah, I was going to say that.
Not quite so meta at the end. Like it goes very meta at the end.
Yes.
This stays totally in universe, and it's fun. It's got like, you've got your obligatory alien misunderstandings. You've got your, the lower deck crew padding their time estimates and the bridge crew figuring out that they were doing that, right? Like,
but not in a good Scotty way.
This is
more of like, it's going to take us 4 weeks to get this done, and then they're just goofing off for 3.5 or something.
Well, it's a little bit of both, right? Like, so well, of course we pad our estimates, but it's actually I think it comes across because they're still Starfleet. They're not really like, I think that's the thing that like it's still it's not slamming Star Trek. It's playing with the kind of goofiness of Star Trek. So it's actually more along the lines of like the lower deck crew is like, well, the bridge crew is always just going to expect us to do things impossibly fast. So let's just tell them like longer than it would actually take so you can get it done in a reasonable time and not be totally stressed out.
Right.
And so in this one particular episode, there's the go-getter who wants to be part of the bridge crew, right? Like he's just the lowly ensign who wants to go out. I mean, he like spoils it for everybody, right? Because he's like, no, but we could be doing so much more. I'm like, but you don't want to. We were going to make our lives miserable, right? And of course, it's goofing off, but like it's really fun.
Sounds a little like real life in some ways.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's still like all of the craziness. Like there's this one like ship filled with terraforming fluid that causes terrible things to happen to the starship and people start transforming. There's an energy being that shows up at one point and like they immediately just like disable it, right? Like, so it's got all the Star Trek goofiness, but I think I very much appreciated, especially since work has been kind of stressful lately just because of all of the craziness that's going on in the world. So seeing other people's craziness is very amusing. That
reminds me, before you move on to your next one, Disney Plus has a new show out for the other Starborn adventures, Star Wars. The Star Wars Lego Holiday Special is now out.
See, I heard about that, but I have not watched it yet.
We might have to talk about that next week or so. So we'll see.
I thought it would be fun to watch with my kids because they grew up playing Lego Star Wars.
Yes.
So I think they would very much appreciate that.
I think it's probably going to be better than the original Star Wars Holiday Special as well.
It's kind of a low bar.
It is a very low bar.
I don't even know that there's actually a bar.
Yeah. If you've ever gone back to try and watch it like on YouTube or whatever, it's bad. It's really bad.
It's really bad. It's not one of those, so bad it's good. It's really just bad.
It's really just bad. So you were watching something else as well.
Yeah, so I also watched Discovery. Mm-hmm. So I've been watching season 1 and season 2 of Discovery, and I enjoy it. I mean, it's not your original Star Trek. It's definitely doing its own thing. There's some challenges that with Klingons I might, get like my Star Trek nerd on and go, I don't know that I'm buying that all the Klingons look different, but somehow came together. But you know what? I'm not going to go there. I have enjoyed Star Trek. I love the inherent optimism of Discovery.
Cool. Are they trying to explain? So like in Star Trek Next Generation and beyond that, all of the Klingons look one way, but in the old series they look completely different. And in Trouble with Tribbles from DS9, like Worf basically says it was a dark time, don't ask me about it.
Yes.
And are they trying to explain that dark time that you're not supposed to ask about?
No, actually, so Star Trek Enterprise, I think, actually handled that. They figured they explained how the ridged Klingons came to be. Now, in Discovery, they just kind of went off on their own little tangent about like there were different, like maybe subspecies of Klingon, or maybe Klingon was I'm not exact. I'm still a little fuzzy on exactly what it was they were trying for.
Like different political aspects.
Yeah, like I don't know. They almost seem like different species because they didn't have either the flat-browed or the rippled brow Klingon. So, I mean, it kind of at the time it kind of felt like they were messing with Klingons just to be able to mess with Klingons. Say like, we're going off in exciting new directions. But it really settled down after its first season, and it had Captain Pike as the commander of the Enterprise or captain of the Enterprise for the second season, which was really good.
Cool.
And now in this current season, they have thrown them like 900 years into the future of the Federation, the future of the galaxy, for reasons which you should watch season 2 if you really want to know. And I think it's starting to be more episode of the week, right? So a little less serialized, a little more like we're going to deal with a particular issue, but still retaining enough memory of the previous episode so that there still feels like there's continuity there. But I'm really enjoying. I mean, I love the optimism of Star Trek. That's why I've always watched Star Trek, and so Discovery is really just hitting that for me right now. Which it's good when the world is a very stressful place. It's nice to be able to turn back to Star Trek and go, yeah, cool. We can solve all the problems in 60 minutes.
Yep. That is.
I wish my life worked like that more often.
yeah, and nowadays having that optimism is a nice thing,
right? Especially since it's like the galaxy's not in a great place. So there was this is not a spoiler. They figured this out like in the first episode. But the Federation is down to like, I don't know, 6 planets. Because there was an event called the Burn, which caused all of the dilithium to explode and like cripple Starfleet, destroy all these starships. And so, the Discovery shows up in a darker time, but they are very much like the beacon of light and hope in a dark time, as opposed to everybody kind of succumbing to that darkness. So that's
cool.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a cool idea.
And so my last development this week is signing up for a thing. I don't know that we would ever really expected to do this, but my wife and I are really busy. The kids are really busy. And we decided to sign up for one of these meal kit subscriptions.
Mm-hmm.
So this is kind of like your Blue Apron, HelloFresh. And the idea is they ship you everything you need to make dinner, and then you actually cook, and then you have made dinner, right? And so the advantage is you don't actually have to go shopping and pull everything together.
You don't even really have to decide. I mean, you probably pick what you want delivered to you, but like that day, it's like, we have a choice of this, or this. Which one do you want?
Right.
We did that as well. And so that was one of the benefits that we found was, one, we got a lot more confident in our cooking, but two, we didn't have to really choose like, okay, what are we having tonight? Do we have the stuff for it? All of those other decisions that need to be made took a lot of stress out.
Yes, exactly. And in the early days of COVID, when we were in like true lockdown here in Pennsylvania, I had a little bit more time because the kids weren't as busy and we weren't as busy. So I had some time to like, okay, I'm finding recipes, I'm going out and actually buying stuff. And I enjoyed cooking. I enjoy cooking in general, and I still subscribe to, the recipe of the week sort of thing. But, it takes time to say, okay, I'm going to go out, I'm going to buy stuff, I'm going to actually do it. So, and I'm not as confident in my cooking as my wife is. My wife is great at just like, oh, well, I have these things in the kitchen, so I'm just going to throw something together and improvise. I'm like, but it's just going to turn into like a pit of goo.
Right. Yeah.
and we have a different room for that.
Yeah. Right.
Like, I don't need to come up with, oh, wow, this is an interesting smell you've discovered, Ken, right? Like, I don't want to do that. And so I think the thought, like you just said, right? Like, it's a way of building up my repertoire of things I'm comfortable with cooking. Somebody else pulls all the ingredients together. I don't know how long we'll maintain it for, but I like the idea of being able to say, okay, I'm going to cook two nights a week, and it's already ready for us. So we shall see how it goes.
Cool. Good luck. So let's go ahead and dive into our main topic here. We have our Thursday game coming up, and you and I were going to brainstorm some Fate Condensed, since you and I are going to kind of swap off every so often for GMing duties, and perhaps others in our group will, but that's not guaranteed right now. I was hoping to come up with some ideas for the setting, the world, some plot hooks maybe that we could both, use occasionally. And for those of you out there, this idea came from a tweet that linked to an article. You find your ideas in weird places. John Roger, who I follow on Twitter, had posted. He's a former showrunner for Leverage and I believe The Librarians, among others. And he had found an article that the Army Corps of Engineers actually owns a large amount of fossils, probably more than any one institution around the world, because they put in things like dams and culverts and levees and things like that. And in the course of doing that, will usually come upon these paleontological finds. And so the idea that he put forth was, hey, what a great way to hide evidence of cryptids in the fossil record, because you can only dig up so much, and you can only look at so much of it at a time. And so having the Army Corps of Engineers have control of a large portion of the fossil record that is currently known is a good way to hide evidence of things like the Mothman or Chupacabra or Bigfoot. And so my idea for this was to have the Army Corps of Engineers. Right now, I'm tentatively calling it the Special Operations Division, and they are responsible for keeping these anomalies hidden in these cryptid anomalies hidden in the fossil record, but also these cryptids actually do exist. They're still alive. And so they're hidden from the fossil record, like, hey, this chupacabra looking thing, it's in the fossil record. We can see the evolution of it, but it's also still surviving. And so the Special Operations Division needs to go and hunt down these cryptids and keep them kind of like Men in Black style of like keeping them under wraps from the population at large. That's what I sold our group on.
And we bought it.
Yep. And we're using Fate Condensed because it's a pretty generic system, although I could totally be sold on Savage Worlds because I think that would probably also fit as well. The idea of having different aspects that each character has, but also the cryptids might have or whatever that allow you to, manipulate the game system and the game world, that's baked into Fate. And so I thought it would be, plus it's also meant for over the top, just action oriented gaming and narrative creative gaming as well.
Right. And from my limited experience with Fate and Spirit of the Century, although I've read a lot, I just haven't gotten to play a lot. Mm-hmm. I think the thing I like about it is as a DM, it gives you certain tools, right? So you can compel aspects. So as a way, we play this game later at night. And so I think as a way of keeping players engaged and keeping us all awake, being able to compel an aspect. Like, so if I know that you're a risk taker, but you seem to be kind of sitting back during the session, I can go, but wouldn't you really like to, jump off that cliff, right? And you push the fate chip across. I don't know how we're going to push the fate chip across because it's a fun dynamic at the table, right? Where you're
it's very tactile.
You really like to do this. It's a very tactile because I hand you the chip and it's like, oh, well, now I have the chip. I mean, you have that pool of resources in front of you, which actually I think as a brief aside, that is one of the challenges with virtual gaming is that you don't have a lot of these things, right? Like in our Savage Worlds game, I was actually trying to call out to the other players, hey, you can Benny this. Right. Yep. You can spend a token to re-roll that. Do you want to do it? Right. Because in Savage Worlds, you're using that mechanic to reward people for good role playing. And it's really, if you're not using it, you're not really playing Savage Worlds the way it was meant to play because it's all about taking risks. Right. Right. Because you spend the Benny to get a Benny. Right. And I think Fate, has some of that too, right? Because you're compelling aspects, you're tagging aspects, and it's making you interact with your environment in a way above and beyond that D&D doesn't really do, right? D&D can.
Yeah, they evolved about the same time. I'm not sure which came first. I actually think Savage Worlds might have come a little before Fate in terms of like the Benny. They might have taken kind of the core concept of the Benny and turned it into the Fate points.
Right.
It's been a while. I can't remember. But yeah, I mean, the idea with Fate is there really should be kind of an ebb and flow of those Fate points in an economy. And in the newer Fate versions, like Spirit of the Century, you and I played, was super gonzo over the top. Like you had like 10 Fate points to start with. And they've toned a lot of that down. Now it's one of the dials you can change. If you want heroic over the top stuff, you can allow people to have more. They call it refresh, which is basically at the beginning of every session. If you don't have your refresh in Fate points, you get to fill up your Fate point pool with that many. If you have extra, you get to roll them over. So if you have a refresh of 3, which is like the more common refresh now, you get to start with 3 Fates. But if you had 6 left over from last time, you still have 6. Right. So it's not a use or lose it, but also if you're not using it, it's not quite as fun as well.
Right. Right.
But and the other concept behind it is the more powerful your character is, you get things called stunts, which are kind of like automatic things that you can just do. And, you can automatically have a bonus towards shooting guns, for instance. The more of those cool things that you have, more heroic or supernatural things that you have, the lower your refresh is, and which means that the GM who can compel aspects, compel you by offering a fate point, you can totally refuse it if you have a fate point to refuse it with. You spend that fate point to prevent the compel. So if you have a lower refresh, the GM can just keep compelling you and you can keep resisting, but eventually you're going to be out and you're going to have to take that complication. But that complication is also meant, well, it obviously complicates the game, but it's also meant to add action and drama and make the game more fun. It's not a tool for the GM to put the characters down. That's
right.
Fate is firmly of the opinion that everyone at the table should be having fun, and that it's not about players beating the GM or GMs beating the players, because that's just a false thing in the first place. The GM can always beat the players because they're the GM.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. It's just not fun.
Rocks fall, everybody dies.
Yes.
That's not many a campaign has ended that way, but I would not like to do that. So
yeah. So I mean, what are your thoughts having heard the pitch for it and knowing that you're gonna step in and GM at some point? Like, what are some of your ideas that you would like to see in the game?
I guess I have some questions.
Okay.
So I think part of it is, and the part of this comes from just having gone through this in our Savage Worlds game, is magic a thing? Right? Because it kind of goes to foundational in the setting. Where are the cryptids coming from? And of course, we can explore that. Like, that could be part of the game, figuring out how this is happening.
Yep.
But if somebody wants to show up as a hex slinger or some other, is there an arcane component? Like, so Warehouse 13.
That was actually one of the things that I was thinking about.
But that's actually
that's Steve Jackson Games. Yep. Yep.
Warehouse 13 has a magical component to it. It also has technological component to it, but there are things like curses. There are things like what have you. Because if you say no, then science kind of steps up to the forefront, and then it's a question of just how wacky. Or the other question would be like how realistic, right? Are we going with like X-Files was usually like with its cryptids kind of trying to skew more closely to these are things that like the tapeworm creature from one of those classic episodes, right? Like where it goes dormant and then it emerges to eat people and then it goes dormant again. Like that was, I can't say it was actually based on science, but it was science-y.
But it was, it was kind of like Star Trek-y science where there was technobabble, but it wasn't mystic stuff. There wasn't a supernatural aspect.
Had plenty of that too, but
right. I mean, I think some of it that could come down to is for my inspiration. I watched the latest and I believe last installment of Tremors, the Tremors movies, and I've been watching the more recent incarnation of Scooby-Doo.
Oh, okay.
And
I have not seen it.
It's pretty good. It harkens back to the old 70s Hanna-Barbera Scooby-Doo, but also like wink and a nod like toward the 70s version of Scooby-Doo, of like whenever Fred is coming up with a way to catch the bad guy, it's always like, okay, we got to get some feathers and some dynamite, and we got to dig a hole. And like two of the episodes that I saw, they're like, no, Fred, no, we can't do that. That's going to take too long or whatever. And then he's super bummed. And then another one was like, okay, I've got our trap. And then basically it's just an unrolled piece of chicken wire that's been stood up. And he's like, and they're like, that's it? That's your trap? It's like, yeah, it's my trap. It's dark out. They're not going to see it. And then random bystander walks into it and gets trapped in it, which means that the big bad can't get trapped in it. So it's those little in jokes that if you've seen the previous series are more funny, but even if you haven't seen the previous series, they're still just as funny. But yeah, I've been kind of reading through it's an Atlas Obscura article about the Army Corps of Engineers where in Iowa a flood at one of their dams happened, and it actually cut like 5 feet of cliff face off and opened up a whole site of these paleontological finds. And so kind of the idea of trying to think of how to build this sort of thing to answer your question of is there magic. I think that's kind of we can leave that up to the group if they want to play a magic type character. I would say I'm fine with that. But that magic is not a normal part of this world. Like if magic was a normal part of the world, why are we hiding cryptids, sort of thing?
Right.
It's kind of the idea of similar to like Dresden Files, where the normal mundane world is our world that we know and love right now, or mostly love. 2020, we could probably jettison. But this is the world we live in, and there's not visible magic. They're not really cryptids. I mean, there are people out there that are going to say yes, there are, and yes, there is magic, but for the most part, that's not what we see. Kind of like Hellboy. Is another one that we can draw from as well. Is like, the world out there doesn't think Hellboy exists, doesn't think all this supernatural stuff exists, but it does. And so that's kind of the idea is, the Special Operations Division of Army Corps of Engineers trying to maintain the status quo of that the supernatural cryptids don't exist. And maybe magic actually does. If cryptids exist, that maybe magic does too. Right. You actually kind of gave me an idea of like maybe some of this fossil record can actually come back all the way to the prehistory days where humans were still around, and Conan walked the earth.
Right. I was gonna say before the oceans drowned Atlantis, right?
Right. So yeah, we could totally have some of that in there too. The idea that this is prehistory, magic existed in Conan's time. And if we say that like Hyboria and Samaria and such existed and Atlantis existed, then we could totally have characters or things from that era come forward. But like the Army Corps of Engineers is specifically focused toward, right, what's in that paleontological record and keeping it safe. So to answer your question, I mean, I have a couple of different ideas. Like, I think it's fun. Like once you start brainstorming, like there's all these cool things that I was just starting to think about, right? Like, so there are projects that the Army Corps of Engineer has had to abandon over time. So one of the big ones in my neck of the woods is the Tooks Island Dam project, which gave rise to, so basically the backstory for this was they were going to dam the Delaware River up in northern New Jersey and Pennsylvania. And so where Tooks Island is this island in the middle of the Delaware, and they were going to build this huge dam and drown like all of the stuff to the north. Mm-hmm. Part of it was because of flood mitigation. So in 1955, there was a massive flood that actually just destroyed some of the bridges in Easton where I live because the water was just so high. Like we're talking, this is like 1,000-year flood, right? Like this was tremendous. I think it was like 15 feet deep in downtown Easton, right? In terms of water, like significant amounts of water. But they also needed to feed the reservoirs and the aquifers in New York City. So the idea was that you were going to build this dam. It would help with flood control downriver. And then you'd also be able to provide water for New York City. Right.
That project didn't happen because there were a lot of objections, but they bought all the land, right? They went in, they bought all the land. And then they created the Delaware Water Gap National Recreation Area, right? Why? But what's the real story behind it? Sure, there was all this political controversy and like conservation efforts, and you're going to cause all this environmental damage if you build this dam. But maybe there's another reason, and maybe the Army Corps of Engineers has a propaganda division, secret propaganda division that like incites people to start objecting to it because, well, actually, if we build this dread dam, really bad things are going to happen. Yep. So now the Park Service is in on it, right? Because they're managing this area that the Army Corps of Engineers built. We also have the Jersey Devil.
Yeah, it could be either like the Jersey Devil or Bigfoot. Maybe they wanted to protect its habitat, or maybe there's a treaty or something. And so they bought it up. They made it look like they were going to do the dam. And just like you said, they have the propaganda department that made them shut it down. But it was after they bought all that land. And so that now protected sort of thing. Yeah, totally a possibility.
And it plays with people's expectations because people have this vision of New Jersey as just like basically the armpit of the country, right? Where it's nothing but highways, but it's not, right? Like
it gets a lot of flack.
we have a lot of trees and a lot of like forested areas, right? And there's actually a lot of places you could easily get lost just wandering around in the woods.
Yep.
And there's a lot of cool legends from colonial times. Like we do have like, people have spotted Bigfoot in New Jersey, right? So yeah, like there's a treaty and it's like, this is how we're going to maintain it. And yeah, occasionally like people do a lot of backpacking in Delaware Water Gap. I certainly do. But, occasionally people see things that maybe they shouldn't. And we're just going to divert them away from those areas because reasons.
Right. Right.
And there have to be so many stories about projects that the Army Corps started, ran into problems with. Like, I think it's great fodder and other things. Like Pennsylvania has I'm sure there's other places as well, but like the roads to nowhere, right? You started building an interstate and then you stopped.
Right.
Why?
Right.
Hell, we have an entire town that was abandoned because it's on fire.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Cetrona, I think it is Cetrona, Pennsylvania. They actually it's a coal town.
And so right. The coal mine is still on fire, smoldering.
Yes.
Yeah,
that's what they told us.
Right. I mean, maybe it's there was a salamander nest that grew, or maybe they were relocated there. Who knows?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, adding salamanders to the list. So
they started a trash fire that was uncontrolled. People can't see my air quotes, but
they can hear them.
What's the price of a small Pennsylvania town when you have to preserve these cryptids that only live in fire?
Right.
How many places in the world are there?
Yep. Yeah, and there was I don't know if it was an Army Corps of Engineers dam, but like there was a dam in Michigan, I believe it was, that collapsed recently, like within the last year or so. And then I don't know what happened since then, but supposedly there were two other dams further downstream that might have also collapsed. And so like what caused that collapse? I was thinking something along the lines of like the old Friday the 13th, the series, something like that. Or there's another short-lived show called Brimstone where a cop who committed murder and went to hell, but there was a jailbreak from hell. And so the devil needs him to bring those people back, and basically has tattoos all over him, and he needs to send all those demons back. And each time he does, one of those tattoos disappears from his skin. But the idea is, going into that is like, what if one of these collapses? What if that was a containment area for cryptids and they got out, right. And now you have to go chase them down, and so maybe that was the cause of one of these collapses or something. That's another one of my ideas. The idea of researching like Army Corps of Engineer projects and ones that went well or ones that didn't go well, or got canceled, sounds pretty darn cool as a mine of information for future games.
I also love when you read about the Army Corps of Engineer, and I think like most game masters, like there's just these things that I squirrel away and like, oh, this will be something useful for the future, right? Like there was a time in like the 50s where we were actively considering using the applied nuclear devices for engineering projects, right? Like actually using nuclear explosives to blow things up.
It'll clear the land really fast.
Nuking hurricanes. That was a thing that people talked about, right?
Yes.
Like, I mean, everybody agrees that it wasn't a great idea.
Right.
Well, most everybody agrees that it wasn't a great idea, but it was a thing, right? And so the Army Corps of Engineers presumably has a whole like weapons division.
That's true. They could. I mean, I know that in NASA, one of the experimental spacecraft, and Larry Niven actually references it in Footfall, was a atomic bomb powered spacecraft. You would, it sat there, and then it basically had a whole bunch of atomic bombs on it, and it would drop one behind it and detonate the bomb, and that would generate the thrust to go up and out. And it wasn't good. It was not a great idea. I mean, yeah, it would probably work if you could build the structure sturdily enough that the blast wouldn't just destroy the spacecraft. But But yeah, kind of like suitcase size nukes were, I think, what was being used there. Yeah, there's a whole lot of stuff from the 50s and 60s that could probably also be mined in terms of like weird science.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. I mean, I read, I think it was last summer, I read Heinlein's The Path Through Tomorrow, which is a collection of his like future history stories. And it was all like, it's all about, so he wrote it before man landed on the moon, right? And so he basically was creating his own space race. And of course, because he was writing this in like the 50s, right? It's all about nukes.
Yeah.
Everything's going to be nuclear powered. Of course, we're going to fly using nukes. Now, he did foretell that, that there would be negative consequences in it, because I think the repository of nuclear material blew up. But it's also very like 1950s science fiction interpretation of atomic energy, right?
Right.
But I love the idea, like, the Army Corps of Engineers, well, they never actually quite stopped working on those things. Maybe they've come up with, come up with a significant enough threat. And yeah, well, we might need one of those, suitcase nukes. And who knows how our campaign world will start to diverge at that point, right? But
right.
So I like that idea. I also like, the opportunity to go abroad, because you always have that episode.
Yes, like leaving the comfort of your own home. Well, I mean, the Army Corps of Engineers is not just, it's part of the Army, so they can go anywhere that the Army is in the world,
right?
Since we seem to do that a lot.
Right. It's not actually going to be a campaign about building dams.
Right. Right. One of my other thoughts of sources to mine is an archive. I think there's an archive in Google Books of the Weekly World News, which is like
Bat Boy.
Bat Boy is the one that everybody remembers. So yeah, it's I think Weekly World News is one of the hot sheets that Kay picks up in Men in Black. So yeah, so that's one of the ones that I think would be a fun one to mine as well. Trying to think of actual questions to like develop things. Like the Army Corps of Engineer was founded in or became a permanent branch of the U.S. Army in 1802. So they've been around for a while. Yeah, well, in the Revolutionary War, according to the article, George Washington wanted fortifications built at Bunker Hill, but they didn't have any engineers, and so they hired several former French officers with appropriate engineering experience, and then because of that need, later on in 1802, they formed the actual Army Corps of Engineers. So they would always have that there. So like building of fortifications and bridges and such. And then later on is when they started doing things like dams, such. So
gotcha.
So they have a long and storied history, and they manage 8 million acres of land in the United States.
Oh, wow.
So
yeah, see, that's perfect, right? So how many cryptids and urban legends are there running amok? Right.
And I mean, that's one of the other things is like, do we want to stick to cryptids? Like 8 million acres of land can have a lot of strange stuff on it. Maybe some of the stuff starts with fossil record cryptids, but maybe it also branches off into other weirdness that just needs to be kept under wraps,
Yeah, and there's a hell of a lot of federal land as well, just above and beyond that, right? And some of that's been irradiated fairly recently. Not to play off of everything is atomic powered, right? But that gives you a lot of interesting things. I've been reading The Immortal Hulk, which is the Hulk rendered as a horror comic, and they've been playing a lot with like that whole like atomic origins of the Hulk. I also like the idea of the history of the Army Corps of Engineers, and if you think back to how on both the Confederate and Union sides during the Civil War, they were bringing in engineers to tunnel underneath fortifications to blow them up, right? And so there's an opportunity to detail our headquarters. Right. Headquarters could date back to 1826, and they just keep expanding it. Right. Not unlike the Lair of Secrets.
Yeah. Or they keep expanding it, but they also cut off certain sections of it. It's like, oh, well, we're not using that section anymore. We don't want people getting hurt or whatever. Or maybe they don't want something found and they wall off a certain section, and so there could be sections from the very early days that get rediscovered and need to be investigated, or things like that.
Right.
Would be another source of adventures.
I think, knowing who your antagonists are is also helpful. So there may be other organizations or government agencies, either we have turf wars with, which is always fun, right? When both people when the plot is less, we're, dealing with the remains of the Nazi Archaeological Society. You can always have Nazis because punching Nazis is fun.
Yep. Like the Thule Society or whatever.
Or, some, splinter organization within the Soviet Union that survives to this day and is doing, there are counterparts that we were always going up against for whatever reasons. But also when your rivals are the federal government is really big.
Yes. Yeah. And they don't.
Plenty of opportunities for turf wars within the federal government and state and local too, right?
Right.
Like, you go into Texas.
Yeah.
Texas Rangers excited to see you.
Right. Right. I mean, it's one of those things of, maybe is there another organization in the federal government that does a very similar job as your unit, as the special operations group? Do they, or special operations division, do they want more control? Do they want more budget? Do they think that the special operations division is not handling it the way they should? I don't know. Have you seen much Supernatural or some of the later seasons of Supernatural?
No, I stopped. I got stuck. I last time I watched Supernatural, I was still getting DVDs from Netflix. And I got out of order. Okay. And I never restarted because I couldn't figure out where I left off. But yes, I'm familiar with like the Mystery of the Week type stuff that they were doing, at least in the early episodes.
So later on, in later seasons, they discover that their mother and father or their ancestors there was a group in the United States called the Men of Letters, and they find like this 1950s 60s era bunker that's like a nuclear fallout shelter, but has all these books of mystic lore and other stuff like that, and a barracks and everything like that. So they basically live there. That's their home now. But then they find out later, and they all died off because of a big cataclysmic event. And that's why Sam and Dean have never really never knew about it until they kind of pieced some clues together and then found this place. But it turns out that there's a British Men of Letters, which is where the Men of Letters originally came from. And the British Men of Letters are like, well, the Men of Letters has been gone for so long, and the hunters over in America just aren't doing a good job at all. And we can do it better. And so that organization has kind of come over to the US and are dealing with Sam and Dean, and has actually killed off a few hunters in, they died in hunts sort of thing. They're covering it up in order to kind of basically displace all the hunters in America and do what they've done in Britain, which is not always nice in the way that they do things, because Sam and Dean have found out that all monsters are not really monsters. They're not all evil. Whereas the British Men of Letters are like, yeah, they're all evil, and we can use them as slaves in certain situations. So there's that whole aspect of a rival organization of like, they're kind of doing the same thing we're doing, but they're also not doing it in the way that we would do it,
Right.
That sort of idea. So I like that idea.
I was also thinking, the Air Force has Operation Blue Book.
Yep.
And, that could just be a cover for dealing with other sorts of threats.
Yep.
And perhaps there's occasionally overlap.
Yep.
And of course they think it's aliens, or maybe not.
I mean, Mothman supposedly flies, I think. So maybe Operation Blue Book
that fly.
That's
Air
Operation
Force
Blue
declares.
Book, right? That's where things overlap.
And then the random guy from Space Force shows up and like tries to declare jurisdiction for reasons.
Yep.
Space Force protects the Earth. We're protecting the Earth.
Yep. Maybe
it's
there's
our territory.
Maybe aliens exist.
Maybe.
Yep. And maybe I don't know. I've got a note here that maybe there's an alien group of settlers on some of the acreage that the Army Corps of Engineers has set up for them. Basically like just a small settlement of refugees from another planet sort of thing. And yeah, that could definitely be like Space Force could come in and say, hey, they're under our jurisdiction now.
Right.
And then, I don't know, bad things could happen or good things could happen. Who knows?
Yeah. So I guess we decided on, so we should have noted this earlier, but, and you probably get from the tone we've been kind of bantering back and forth is we're not going for super serious.
No.
We're not going for super silly either. Somewhere in between.
Yeah. I had sent out a survey for everybody, was like on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is like Looney Tunes and 10 is, I don't know what I put for 10, but 10 is super serious. Like, I don't know, Dark Knight Returns or something like that. Grimdark or whatever. Most people said somewhere between 3 and 6 or 7. I think about the 5 or 6 area is probably where we'll go. Some comedic elements. Some of the stuff that was tossed out was like Ghostbusters and Men in Black. Sometimes trending towards Scooby-Doo, which is on the more silly side. Yeah. So that was tone wise. That's what we were looking for. I don't know. We should probably do this again. Talked for a little while on this. But we're going to be creating characters this Thursday. You said something earlier about like the people that you guys are going to be involved with. I think maybe we can come up with some of that this Thursday as well, of like, who's your superior officer?
Right.
Who is a rival of you, like in the Army Corps of Engineers, or even come up with a rival organization even on Thursday, depending upon how awake people are. So.
Right. And I guess, so I'll ask you, because you earlier you showed me a big pile of Fate books. Are there anything in there that has like some random tables that we can happily roll some dice for to fuel our creativity?
I will have to look for that. Fate did have a Fate world literally called Weekly World News, or no, Weird World News. And it is literally based off of Scooby-Doo. Because you have like on the front cover of it is basically the analogs of all the Scooby-Doo characters, except instead of a dog, there's an eagle, an anthropomorphized eagle, and it has, which is weird because it also has front claws and back legs. So I'm not exactly sure what it is, but the art style is very Scooby-Doo. And so, I mean, that's one thing that we could look into, but that's also kind of like, that's literally Scooby-Doo. It's the mystery of the week. And at the end of the mystery, you pull off the rubber mask, which is not what we're aiming for this game.
Right. So I think being able to set like, so we talked more kind of world buildy type stuff. I think knowing where we're based, is there a town nearby? Are we in New York City, or are we in like some small, like,
are you in Iowa
Pennsylvania
or something?
Yeah.
Iowa town, Pennsylvania. Like,
yeah. How do we get to and from? We're at a rail location because we have to use Amtrak to get everywhere, right? Like we're with the federal government, so you have to, you can travel anywhere for free, but you have to go by train.
Got it. Yeah.
Which I have a friend of mine who loves trains. So I mean, but those kinds of goofy things, like, or not even goofy, but like, how does the bureaucracy manifest in ways that are both helpful, amusing, and occasionally hampering, right? What's the town like? Where do we go to for drinks afterwards? Like, you've bagged your cryptid, you've dealt with the situation. Does everybody go down to Harry's for, a beer? That kind of thing.
Right.
So if you think about Eureka, right, which is another series that actually we might draw some inspiration from. I mean, That was more super science, but like Eureka was a small town, and it had, the coffee place, it had the diner. Those showed up frequently. Occasionally hilarity ensued.
Yeah, but also everybody in Eureka knew about the things that were going on in Eureka. So if there was a experimental robot that suddenly ran amok, people are like, "Oh, it's another robot run amok. We're going to run screaming because it's trying to kill everybody." But they're not surprised that another robot has run amok,
Right. Oh, we're stuck in another time loop.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Right. Yeah. because everyone there is part of what's been happening, or is employed by, I can't remember the company name, but it's employed by, I think it's General Dynamics, or something like that is the name.
Yes.
Plus it had Matt Frewer in
Yes.
it, who was formerly Max Headroom.
So, I mean, I think, we can probably brainstorm a little bit more, but I think we should, coming up with some things like that we want people to riff off of, knowing that our brains are usually run down a little bit at 9 o'clock. Like, okay, we're going to come up with like the town, 3 locations in the town, our supervisor, 3 NPC coworkers, right? Like, so we have some fodder as to like what it is we're actually trying to do. And I have to read the Fate condensed rules because I should probably be prepared.
Yep. That would help.
So there's our to-do list. If you all have ideas for things that we should be talking about or incorporating or what have you, we'd love to hear them.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, Ken, why don't you take us out? I think I took us out last week.
Yeah, so again, any comments, suggestions, feedback, world building stuff you'd like to contribute, let us know. You can send it to us at podcast@lairofsecrets.com or via Twitter @Lair of Secrets. You can also visit lairofsecrets.com and leave us some feedback, topic ideas. I'm repeating myself at this point. Going back to the beginning of the show, although it's like we're looped. We're in a time loop. I'm repeating myself over